My name is Byron Martin. I am a co-owner of Logie's Greenhouses, and today we're talking about orchids. And the discussion today is not going to surround varieties of orchids or different species of orchids, but more the culture and care of them, and trying to address some of the problems we have in orchid culture. The family of Orchidaceae is one of the largest families of plants in the world, and it spans from the tropics all the way up into the coldest areas of the world. Probably not into the tundra, but you may even find some orchids that grow there. We have native orchids here in Connecticut. The ones that you probably, is that better? The ones that you probably would be recognized would be our lady slippers, which used to be in the Pathopetalum group of orchids, of which there are also tropical varieties. Then we have some small, colorful ones. So the thing about orchids is it's diverse. And there are orchids that are very easy to grow, and there are orchids that are almost impossible to grow. Today we're actually going to be dealing mostly with tropical orchids. That's probably where the greatest amount of variety exists in our tropical rainforest. And it happens from the humid, wet cloud forests all the way to areas that, have 6 months without a drop of water. And one of the things in learning how to grow orchids, or with any plant, is trying to understand the climatic conditions and the environmental conditions that that particular plant thrives or survives in. And then you try to, in some way, replicate it, or at least you try to create some kind of a growing system that has some relationship to that. For instance, if you were in an area where there was 6 months of no water, and there was also a cool period, you might want to think about how does that relate to the growth of an orchid. And one of our greatest commercial orchids of all times is the Phalaenopsis, the moth orchid, of which we have some right here. Everybody recognize these? This has become a commodity, meaning that these are grown literally by the millions. And this particular plant has its origins from the Asian and Pacific region rainforests. But in that area, like as in the Philippines, where much of this type of large flowers, big sprays come from, I think the species is Amabilis, that actually gives us the white flower on the Phalaenopsis. They have 6 months without any water at all, any rain. They have a dry season, they have a wet season. And so what happens is the clouds come in and it starts to rain, and it rains and it rains and it rains, and everything is wet. And these plants are growing as epiphytes. Does everyone know what an epiphyte is? Okay. An epiphyte is a plant that grows out of the ground and on a structure, generally a tree. The other word that we're going to use today is terrestrial. Those are plants that actually are surviving in the ground and anchor themselves in the ground. So almost all of our plants out here are terrestrial. We don't even think of it that way, but in the orchids, there are either orchids growing up in the trees or they're growing in the ground. Or there's actually a plant that's called semi-epiphytic, meaning that some of its life can actually be spent growing in the ground. And a great example of that would be the vanilla. Okay. So the vanilla is a vine, and if you ever just Google it and take a peek at some of the pictures of some of these vanilla growers or some of the vanilla vines that maybe are in conservatories, they're aggressive. Once they get going, they just vine all over everything. But those roots always, which are epiphytic, stick to a tree, stick to a wall, and they drop themselves down until they hit the ground, and then they go off into the ground accessing moisture and food. So it does both. Right? So getting back to the Phalaenopsis, so it has the cycle of dry and wet. And it also has a cycle where the clouds come in and the rain comes in and summer comes in and the temperatures rise. And then it also has a period when all the clouds disappear and temperatures cool down. And there's actually a mechanism in that stimulates the flowering. So the question is, this is one of the big questions, why won't my orchid flower? We have tons of green, and the interesting thing about orchids is they have the most beautiful flowers in the world, but you go into an orchid collection, all you see is a bunch of green leaves. Yeah, because for one thing, most orchids, especially species orchids, have a short window of bloom. The Cattleya, or as we call them for short, cats, and these are some of the cat hybrids, they actually the flowers only last for 2 weeks at the most, and some orchids can only last 3 days. So you're spending a lot of time like growing this orchid, and then all of a sudden this bloom goes. It's very well worth it because there's tremendous beauty and sometimes fragrance in it. But you have to understand that it's not all the time, with the exception of the Phalaenopsis, which can bloom pretty much year round. That's one of the reasons why they made it into what we would call commodities or the big time. Another one is they grow very fast. So does everybody know? You probably don't. The way orchids are grown commercially is it's done from either tissue culture or it's done from seed. And seed growing is, in tissue culture, actually very similar. And I got into orchids like really. Does anybody remember my orchid thing I got into? Yeah. I mean, you go down to greenhouses, and I had bottles everywhere, so all over the place, of all these little seedlings that I was growing. And they grow them in vitro, I mean, they grow inside of a container. We use bottles with agar as a substrate to grow them in under sterile conditions, so we had to have a lab to do all this stuff in. And I mean, I really got carried away. So the thing is that the Phalaenopsis can actually go from seed to flower in 1 year, where the Cattleya, it'll take 3 to 5 years. Or, and I don't have any here, but Vandas, you probably don't know, those are the ones where the leaves come out and they go higher and higher and they just keep coming out opposite. Beautiful flowers, fairly long lasting. In this climate, they can actually take 10 to 12 years. And I had some Vanda seedlings that I started and I never saw them bloom. I left the orchid grow before they flowered. However, the interesting thing is that in Thailand, where they have very long days constant near the equator, they can actually bring Vandas into flower in less than a year, from taking them out of the bottle and growing them on. I mean, the Thai growers, some of them do a very good job at it, but it's the difference in climate and light level that we have here in Connecticut. So the real understanding of orchids is trying to get an idea of what the species is and what its climatic conditions are to grow it.